Hello, friends. Welcome back to Freakish Fridays. Tattooed Biker here with you. And tonight I have one lined up that will send shivers down your spine. In this episode, I'll be diving into the world of the paranormal as I read 3 bone-chilling stories submitted by viewers that took place in graveyards and cemeteries. From eerie apparitions to ghostly whispers, brace yourselves as we dive into these true and terrifying encounters that'll leave you questioning the thin veil between our world and the next. So now, just kick back and enjoy the ride. Number 1. Dear Biker, this is a long one. I've had some strange, scary, and inexplicable things happen to me in my childhood, but this event will forever haunt my existence. I was about 13 years old at the time, now 25, when my best friend, we'll call her Sarah, and 2 other boys in our grade decided to hang out in town. We grew up in a small town in New Jersey where there wasn't much to do, besides hanging out at local parks and such in the area. We decided to walk to this one park on a lake that sits at the bottom of a large wooded hill. On top of that hill is a cemetery. It was broad daylight, early afternoon time, so being young and dumb, we decided to just take a walk through the cemetery and thought nothing of it. My best friend was wiping off debris from tombstones and monuments in an effort to respect the dead. We were reading the gravestones and speaking aloud the names of the individuals. It was actually really peaceful. The 4 of us decided to sit in a patch of grass a little ways away from the graves to relax after walking around. We naturally sat in a circle formation, and Sarah was next to me, to my left. We were engaged in conversation when I suddenly noticed that Sarah had gone really quiet. I looked over at her, and she was staring off into nothing. I immediately asked her if she was okay, and she sort of snapped out of it and said that, yeah, she's fine. A minute or so later, she was staring into space, and she covered her ears. I asked what was going on, and she said, "I can't hear. They're screaming at us." Now I'm terrified, and I ask, "Who's screaming?" She doesn't respond and starts to rock back and forth. My heart is beating out of my chest. I call her name again, and I instinctively throw my cell phone right at her head, and she didn't even flinch. She rocked back and forth for a few more seconds before looking down into her lap. She then looks up at me with the most evil, demonic smile. Her face was fixed in an expression I've never seen her make, and so it didn't even look like her face. Immediately, I knew she was possessed. This was my absolute worst nightmare come true, and I was terrified to my core. There are no words to describe the overwhelming amount of fear that suddenly consumed me. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I just blacked out. I came to a few seconds later and found myself about 100 feet away from her and the boys. She was still staring at me, smiling completely, not even blinking. I was screaming and crying her name, and I was frozen with fear. She finally broke her demonic gaze from me, looked back into her lap, got up, and ran away right into the woods. It took me a few seconds to unfreeze, and I came to the realization that she was in danger and I needed to go after her. I ran, grabbed my cell phone, and followed her into the woods down the hill, and to the park area where I find her sitting on a swing. I approach her and ask if she's okay. She's extremely disoriented and asks, "Where are we?" "We needed to stay. We need to go back." And I said, "No, we're not staying. We need to get the hell out of here. I literally have to drag this girl out of the park." The park and cemetery are located on Native American grounds. There were a group of people at the park for a cultural event who asked us if we were okay and if one of us had screamed. I just said yes, it was me, but everything was fine. When we got out of there, we all just had a "what just happened" moment of silence. Sarah didn't remember anything. She said that she remembered sitting down with us on the grass, and she remembered the voices screaming at us, and that they were telling us to leave. Then she said she felt like she was having a nightmare, and was dreaming of what she assumed to be hell because there was fire everywhere. She didn't recall saying she wanted to stay at the park or being dragged out. The boys were speechless and really didn't have much to add. From that day on, I would have demonic nightmares 4 to 7 nights a week until my freshman year of college. The nightmares would always involve a possession or an extremely dense, heavy air that signified a demonic presence. I was always weighed down by the energy and could barely get away in time. When my dream, I realized that the demon was present. I'm still friends with this girl to this very day, and we've only mentioned it a handful of times. My logic was that if I ignored it or didn't speak about it, it would go away. And eventually it did. Once in a great while, I'll still get the nightmares. To this day, I can't help but wonder if I was haunted by the demon after the incident, or if it was just some kind of severe PTSD. No one that I've shared this with could ever relate to my experience. If anyone hearing this could, I would love to hear about it. Biker, if you made it this far, then thank you for reading. Number 2. Hey TB. So about a week ago, I came back to visit my home country in Romania. I'm from a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. As my grandmother passed away last year, I decided to take a stroll by myself and visit her grave. In order to get a better understanding of my experience, I'll need to explain the layout of the cemetery. It's located on the outskirts of the town, on a hill. The rail passes by the cemetery, and one has to cross it in order to get to the street leading to the entrance. The big cemetery is located right at the entrance. It is Orthodox. The smaller Pentecostal cemetery is separated and is further uphill, about a 10-minute walk with a separate entrance. In between these two cemeteries, on the hill, there's a small section of about 8 or 9 graves, where people who have committed suicide are buried, as the Eastern Orthodox Church prohibits anyone who has committed suicide to be buried in the normal cemetery. Anyway, my grandma is buried in the small Pentecostal cemetery up the hill. I walked there, visited her grave, all good so far, but as I left, I was coming down the hill on the road. I felt an urge to enter the small section for the suicides. I entered it and started checking the names on the stones. Most of them were in their 20s and 30s. I suddenly started feeling really drained and dizzy, as if something was taking all the energy out of my body. I left and went back on the road. When I got to the entrance to the Orthodox cemetery, I decided to enter it as well, to visit my nephew's grave, who died at just 4 days old, about 12 years ago. As I was walking through the graves, I felt like I was being watched. There was no one there except for me, and all of a sudden I heard a popular nursery song about spring being sang in the distance by an adult male voice. It sounded almost like a whisper. At that exact same time, the barrier's bells from the rail crossing started ringing. That was the moment when I had a full-blown panic attack and I started running. As I was running, I constantly felt watched. I only started feeling better once I got back into the town. This happened 2 days ago, and almost every time I close my eyes, all I can see is that small section of the cemetery for the people who had committed suicide. I feel utterly traumatized. Bear in mind, I'm an atheist, and I don't really believe in the paranormal, but this really left me shook. What do you think? Number 3. Dear Tattooed, new girl here. I figured I would tell about one of my encounters since my daughter loves hearing them, and she's encouraged me to share. I worked as a certified tour guide in Washington, D.C. and Arlington National Cemetery for about 3 years in the early 2000s. During that time, I was dual studying English and history, and I was present for over 3,200 burials. That's not a typo, and I won't be discussing anything around those burials. as they are far too new, so please bear with me on that front. I will, however, tell you about the older spirits there and around the DC area. When I started as a tour guide, especially at the cemetery, I was excited at the possibility of spirits. I'd felt and seen a few things as a child, but nothing definitive enough for a growingly adult mind. I was 18 when I first met this spirit, and he's one of the first ones that I fondly remember that I can consistently say after no longer working there that I still go back and visit comfortably. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I was, of course, volunteered for the closing shift. The closing shift back then was basically taking the tram around the main drag, the perimeters used to regulate traffic and walking traffic, common areas to ensure that all visitors had vacated the cemetery. I'd ride the tram I narrated from and get off in areas where trees or buildings might obscure lingering visitors. Or I'd get to say hi to some of the guards if they were off duty. This was a job the seasoned narrators hated, and only one driver did, and it was her route or get out. I didn't understand why, but most of them were scared of ghosts, and none would have called themselves sensitive or psychic. They stuck to the general party line that they just stayed out of their way, so they can stay out of mine. On my first trip, I had asked my driver, we'll call her Dottie, about her favorite spirits, and got the lecture that she didn't have to believe in spirits, and that we should just get our work done. I pushed and asked for her favorite ghost story then. And she caved and told me there was one story she happened to like. I asked where, and she mentioned it was a ghost, far off at the end of the perimeter, but along our closing route. She said he was allegedly a Confederate, but she had decided to forgive him for that. She had heard his story since she came to the cemetery, almost 20 years ago. So naturally, I asked her to point him out when we go by. Pretty sure that the drivers were going to try pranking the new girl who believed in ghosts again, like they had by screwing with my locker a few days ago. Dottie drove us along the far perimeter of A&C until we were basically within running distance of Fort Myer and at the Jackson Circle in the Confederate Memorial. There's a chill there, despite it being summer and the trees nearby not providing direct shade, and there are no birds singing nearby. It's quiet and eerie, but not the uncomfortable pressure or weight of Section 1, it's just kind of off. I take a look around, but I don't feel or sense anything, and certainly nothing is visible. So I ask her what I'm looking for. You'll know when you see him. He's shy. He'll get used to you, she said, shrugging. As we pulled away, she turns and yells, "Good night, boy," out the window, and we continue on. Same thing on the second night, and the third. The fourth night, it was late June, closer to 4th of July, and as we're cruising on McPherson Drive, I hear faint drums. The band is up practicing awfully late, I tell Dottie, going over the clipboard with the closing checklist. That band would never play that, she replies. We cross a certain point on McPherson, where the pressure and weight shifts slightly, and the drumming is just a touch louder. I try to listen closer now that we're closer, and I feel like I'm gut-punched. That's Dixie, isn't it? Yes. Are you punking me? No. So that's coming from the Confederate section? That's your ghost? Oh, he's not my ghost, but yes, that's him. I think it's a little too convenient and frankly a bit disrespectful to even mess around like that in a good sport, so I tell her to stop the tram. You're going to go out there? Out there to look? I'm super suspicious now. Yes, definitely now that you ask. She says, girl, you're a weird one. I can see it in your face. You know that's not something you need to go poking in, but if you want to go, just go. Just do a sweep while you're out there. We had a school group in today and they went that way. I nod and jump off the tram. Mind you, we have to wear these weird 1940, 1950 looking uniforms, so it's not as agile or graceful as I'd hoped in my head. I stepped up the pathway and began to march down to the center of the Confederate section and to the statue memorial. The drumming gets a touch louder until I'm about 2 circles in, and then it stops. So I stop. Every sense is screaming that this is something other than normal. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and no birds, no sounds. The chill on a summer evening that shouldn't be there, and the air now tastes crisp like in fall. "Hello?" I say. Of course nothing answers, so I walk around the entire memorial. When I'm about 180 degrees opposite, the drum does a snare and then falls silent when I run back around like a maniac. There's no one hiding there. No speakers by the trees. No kids escaping their school field trip. No one is there. But Dottie was right. I knew that. "What's your name?" I ask. Silence. "I didn't mean to scare you. I liked your drumming. You're very good at it." Answered only by silence. "Okay, I'll leave you be. You have a good night." There's a soft, cold breeze that goes along my back as I leave, but doesn't go through the outlying trees at all. And once I'm at the last 2 rings of the graves, the drumming picks back up. I walk right under the tram and stare at Dottie, who has a really smug grin on her face. "Hey, you said you don't believe in them." She replied, "Oh, I never said that, girl. You came to that conclusion. I just said I don't have to believe in them, but not because I don't think they're real, because I know they're real. They've worked here before me and will work here long after. I just don't make a habit of bothering them. Lucky for you, he's one of the good ones. Good kid, minds his business, and I think he just gets lonely." She's smiling with a grandmotherly gleam, and I get it. It all clicks. "He's why you always run the night shift." She nods. Someone has to say goodnight. I laugh and say, "Okay, Dottie, I'll add it to the list." "Atta girl. Now get on and sit down. I don't like to be here after sunset, friendlies or no." I'd continue to visit the drummer for as long as I worked there, always making sure to say goodnight when I closed and hello when I went by during the day. And when I came back to the cemetery, I made sure to visit his post, just to say hello. And I encourage you, if you can, to go by and say hello too. And there it is. All I have for tonight. I hope you all enjoyed these spine-tingling encounters from the other side. If you have any paranormal experiences of your own, or any suggestions for future videos, go ahead and leave them in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on all things unexplained and unsolved. So until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.